The Tenerife crash is the deadliest crash of all time. A month or so ago, I put out a video about the Tenerife crash, and that was based on the Spanish report. In the case of the Tenerife crash, there are basically two reports, one by the Spanish authorities and one by the Dutch. They both agree on the facts, but they disagree on the interpretation of those facts. Most of the videos on the internet I've seen are based on the Spanish report, and I haven't really seen any that take a look at things from the Dutch point of view, and that is what we're going to do today. Today we'll go through the Dutch comments on the Spanish report. Before we go any further, I've covered the circumstances leading up to the crash in my other video, which you can find on your screen right now. I highly suggest that you watch that or watch another documentary on YouTube before proceeding so that you have context going forward. So, let's look at how the Dutch see things, shall we? The first issue that they tackle is the argument that the crew was under stress and they were rushing to take off to meet their duty time requirements. The Dutch investigators point to the calm and relaxed method in which the taxiing and the takeoff was conducted. According to them, this shows that the crew of the KLM was not hurrying to take off, as they did everything in an orderly manner. If you'll think back to the other video, you'll recall that the captain of the KLM ramped his engine power up and the first officer of the KLM had to stop him and go, "Wait a minute, we don't have ATC clearance." This was recorded as the plane moving forward ever so slightly on the FDR. The captain responded with, "No, I know that, go ahead and ask." The Dutch report says that the engines were ramped up to an EPR or engine pressure ratio of 1.10. The EPR value is a measurement of the thrust generated by the engines. The higher the value, the more thrust you're generating. The Dutch said that this was perfectly normal, and this is done to check the spin-up of the engine prior to takeoff. According to them, this does not indicate that the crew were hurrying to get airborne. Listening to the CVR, it was evident that for most of the flight, on the flight deck, the captain was acutely aware that he did not have clearance to take off. The first officer had reminded him of that fact. So let's go through the events of that day, second by second, to see what happened. At 5:05 and 53 seconds, the controller gave the KLM crew the following bit of information. KLM 8705, you are cleared to the Papa Beacon, climb and maintain flight level 90, right turn after takeoff, proceed with heading 040 until intercepting the 325 radial from Las Palmas VOR. The controller was basically telling the crew what they needed to do once they were in the air, and as always, the first officer starts a readback of the clearance. Roger sir, we're cleared to the Papa Beacon, flight level 90, right turn out 040 until intercepting the 325, and we're now at takeoff. That transmission began at 5:06 p.m. and 9 seconds, and it lasted till 5:06 and 17 seconds. At 5:06 and 11 seconds, the captain says, "Let's go, check thrust," and the brakes were released. If you've been paying attention, nowhere during that exchange was a takeoff clearance given. There was 6 seconds between the brakes being released and the end of the first officer's readback. So why did the captain take off? Quote, after the tower had issued the clearance, the captain started the takeoff run while the first officer was reading back the clearance. It is considered a normal human way of thinking of the captain that, where the entire preparation of the takeoff was finished and the captain on the basis of the radio communication was convinced to have a takeoff clearance, he no longer wanted to lose time where the conditions of visibility at that moment allowed for a safe takeoff. Also, taking into account the preceding calmness and discipline in the cockpit, this operational deviation of 6 seconds is not considered a factor which indicates an already pre-existing general picture of hurry, nor does it imply a serious operational error. It has no direct connection with the misunderstanding that had already arisen from the radio communication. I know that was a wall of text, but basically the captain thought that he would be cleared for takeoff once the first officer finished his readback, and that does happen quite a lot. After your readback, the tower usually just says, "Readback correct, cleared for takeoff." And in this instance, that's probably what the captain expected. So as per the Dutch report, the premature release of the brakes and the start of the takeoff roll 6 seconds before the co-pilot could even finish his readback was, quote, not a serious operational error. The captain just wanted to take off right then and there when the visibility was above the minimum for takeoff, so that's why he took off. It's almost as if he had fallen into a pattern where he expected clearance to be given at the last second, but this time it never came. The report does acknowledge that the captain might have been a bit absent-minded because he did ask for information that was already provided to him. Moreover, the first officer was not as experienced as the captain, and the captain was one of the most respected pilots at KLM. Van Zanten, the captain, was so high up the ranks that when KLM executives heard about the crash, they tried to get in touch with Van Zanten to head the investigation. Flying with a captain like that can be intimidating. Some first officers might be scared to point out his mistakes to the captain himself. But the first officer on the KLM plane did do that. He told his captain that they did not have clearance when he thought that they were about to take off. So from this, they concluded that the crew of the KLM was not hurrying and that they were not stressed. So that's why the KLM crew started down the runway. But there's more to the story. Now let's look at the linguistics of all of this. This crash came down to miscommunication. So a few key phrases were examined. As we all know, the KLM captain started down the runway before he was given explicit clearance. After the readback, the tower controller said, "Okay, stand by for takeoff. I will call you." There was a 2-second gap between the "okay" and the rest of the sentence. This transmission coincided with the Pan Am crew saying, "No, and we're still taxiing down the runway, Clipper 1736. This caused a shrill noise in the KLM cockpit, which caused them to pretty much miss out on everything but the OK. The controller started talking at about 5:08 and 18 seconds, and from 5:08 and 19 seconds, the heterodyne blocked everything out. So what does OK mean? The tower controller used OK to mean, "Hey, I heard your transmission," and the crew took it to mean, "He has cleared us for takeoff." This further reinforced the idea in the captain's mind that they were clear to go. The Pan Am crew knew the danger of the OK, and that's why they said that they were still taxiing down the runway. But unfortunately, the KLM crew did not hear it. Another thing that was extensively analyzed was the phrase, "We are at takeoff." It can be interpreted in many different ways. One is that they're at the takeoff point, or two is that they're actually taking off. It's an ambiguous statement in this situation. Remember how the flight engineer was the only one in the KLM cockpit to suspect something when he said, "Is he not clear then?" The Dutch comments say that this is proof that everyone in the cockpit was convinced that the runway was clear and takeoff clearance had been given. The first officer phrased it as a question and not as a statement, which meant that the transmission from the Pan Am saying that they'll report when they were clear of the runway challenged the mental picture that he had of the situation. The report went on to say that had the flight engineer been aware that the runway was not clear, he would have taken action to reject the takeoff. In addition to all of this, they might have been subconsciously tuning out any message that did not have the KLM call sign in it. Another thing that the Dutch report pointed out were the coincidences: the fog, the congestion at the airport, the misunderstood terminology, the pause between the OK and the rest of the sentence, the heterodyne, the KLM crew not paying enough attention to the transmission of the Pan Am, and a situation where they got their ATC clearance on the runway itself. ATC was ready to give their ATC clearance, that is, clear them to the pop-up beacon and to give them their heading and altitudes well before they got to the runway. But at that time, the crew of the KLM was busy with other checklists, so they put it off for later. Since they got it while they were on the runway, it added to the notion that they had their takeoff clearance. So, ultimately, what conclusion does the Dutch report come to? They do agree that the KLM 747 did take off without clearance, and that was because they had, quote, absolute conviction that clearance had been obtained, and the reason for this false conviction was due to the terminology used, end quote. So in short, it came down to the captain believing that he had permission to take off. The reason he believed that was because of the usage of non-standard terminology. In my last video about Tenerife, I called this report the report from an alternate timeline, and I hope you can see why that is. The facts are the same, but it's interpreted in a slightly different way. So what do you think? Do you think the Dutch report holds up? Let me know what you think. Thank you for watching this episode of Mini Air Crash Investigation. If you like the videos that I make, do consider liking and subscribing. It will really help the channel grow. A big thank you to L Aviation for letting me use his amazing footage on my video. I'll catch you guys next time. Stay safe.